remove my picture? Do you know?
Remove? It's removed.
But this is, I think the only way to remove it is in your Zoom account.
Oh, okay. All righty. Well, it's on.
It's a very nice picture.
It is a nice picture.
Thanks, Paul. Okay, it'll just stay that way.
Okay, good day, everybody that's joining. We have some people still coming in. You are very welcome to this second edition of CESA Higher Education in Focus. We see that the participant numbers are climbing. That's excellent. So I'm going to formally open the event, even though we still have some people joining. As you can all see, this is a normal Zoom meeting format, which means that you all have the ability to speak and also to put your camera on. We would encourage you, of course, to mute your microphone if you are not speaking, and if we hear some background noise, we might mute it for you. So welcome everyone. My name is Elizabeth Colucci. I will be speaking very little today, but I am formally opening this event on behalf of the HAQUA 2 implementing team. HAQUA is the initiative entitled Harmonization, Accreditation, and Quality Assurance in African Higher Education. It is a flagship initiative of the European Union in partnership with the African Union Commission. HAQUA is supporting a series of dialogue events called CESA Higher Education in Focus. CESA stands for the Continental Education Strategy for Africa, and we will shortly hear more about that from one of our colleagues from the African Union Commission. Before I proceed in welcoming some of our first speakers this morning, I just wanted to make some technical announcements. You will note that we have interpretation. So if you look at the bottom of your screen on the Zoom menu, you will see an icon called interpretation. It looks like a little globe. And there you can select one of 3 languages, English, French, or Portuguese. We have selected these languages to be as inclusive as possible in these continental African events. As you know, we bring together many different linguistic communities in the African continent. We haven't included all of the languages, but we have included 3 quite important languages. And so we do hope that we will have a lot of participants today joining us from different language groups. Please note that you don't have to use the interpretation. If you understand all of the languages, you can simply leave it as off if you prefer. In addition to that, this event will be recorded today. The one nice element of today's activity is that there will be breakout group discussions, and our host, Charmaine Villet, will be explaining that come the time. When you registered, you had the opportunity to select a breakout group. If you hadn't decided at the time, you will be able to decide when we come to the point of the meeting where you can select the breakout group, because your screen will indicate which thematic subgroups are possible. And finally, I would just like to say that this event is recorded. I think I mentioned that previously. The breakout groups will also be recorded. So all of this material will be available on the CESA in Focus website and also on the HAQUA 2 website after the event. I would like now to introduce a few speakers who will be giving some short welcoming words. In first instance, Deirdre Lennon from the European Union Commission, who has been very much the champion of Africa-EU partnership in higher education, and is the project coordinator of the HAQUA initiative. Deirdre, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And hello, Charmaine, it's lovely to see you. We collaborated together on Tuning Africa in the framework of the Africa-EU partnership. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I'd like to welcome also the colleagues from the African Union Commission, the AAU, INEA, if they're present, and the colleagues at Obreal and all the participants here today. I think the topic that's going to be discussed today is particularly relevant not only for Africa, but also for Europe. We're going through profound reflections and on how education was affected by the pandemic, and also how we really need to transform education to build skills for the future, and the role of teaching, the role of contents, the skills that the students are expected to acquire during their study programs. And so all this is particularly relevant. The partnership that we have with the African Union, African member states, and in particular in the field of higher education, it's a very prominent part of our agenda for the coming 6 years. And significant funding will be made available through Erasmus, notably, to be able to support projects and initiatives that yourselves, your universities, would like to undertake to support some of the discussions, the debates, and the initiatives that you might think of undertaking as a result of these debates. The HAQUA initiative is supporting the African Union's continental agenda, and it's in this framework that this event has been taking place, and I'm very pleased to be able to hear the discussions today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deirdre, and thank you for being with us today. I would now like to give the floor to Emmanuel Chigozie, who joins us from the African Union Commission. He is responsible for all the initiatives linked to higher education under the Africa-EU Strategic Partnership. Emmanuel, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can.
Apologies, my video is not coming on, but I'll just give the remarks either ways. My name is Chigozie Emmanuel Okonkwo, and I'm with the Education Division of the African Union Commission. And on behalf of my principal, the acting head of Education Division at the African Union Commission, Mr. Hambani Masheleni, it is a pleasure to welcome us to this auspicious event in the series of CESA Higher Education in Focus events. Colleagues, COVID-19 has forced us to a new paradigm that affects how we work and how we deliver on our mandate and promises to the African citizenry. Even though COVID-19 is first of all a health crisis, we as stakeholders active in education development can testify to the impact it had on teaching, learning in Africa especially. The theme of today's discussion, preparing higher education students for a complex world and exploring the fluidity of teaching, learning, and curriculum post-COVID, comes at a critical time when institutions of higher learning are reimagining their mode of teaching, students are reimagining their mode of learning, and education policymakers and curriculum developers are reimagining the relevance of curriculum to meet the present day challenge. Looking at the theme of the discourse today, it is ideal that we are already exploring the fluidity of teaching, learning, and curriculum. But it is also important to highlight current efforts geared towards ensuring continuous learning and teaching, even in the midst of the pandemic. Whilst the COVID-19 is first and foremost a member state public health challenge, we at the AUC have an important and central role to support them, to coordinate our AU-wide response and help ensuring that potential needs and gaps are met. This is precisely why we have been, in the past year, our education sector response, which is drawn from the DOTS framework, which is DOTSS, which speaks to digital connectivity of schools. This advocates for schools and other learning institutions to be connected to the internet and to become hub for providing internet access to deprived community. The O, which stands for online learning, seeks to provide distance learning content, deploying radio, TV, podcast, and online e-learning facilities to mitigate against the challenges of today. The T stands for teachers as facilitators and motivators of learning. We identified that teachers should deploy relevant technologies such as webinars to continue to engage and motivate learners to learn. We also speak of S, which is safety online and offline. As more children, pupils use the internet for learning, they become increasingly vulnerable to online exploitations. We also speak of the second S, which is skills focused learning, which I think is more relevant to the discussion here today. The curriculum that we issue out should embrace the 360 degrees approach to skills development, combining foundational, digital, 21st century, and entrepreneurial job skills to address the challenges of today. It is our belief that with this framework, continuity of learning is assured, and most importantly, education in Africa is transformed to better mitigate against similar challenge in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure we'll learn a lot from our speakers here today on the subject matter. But before I yield the floor, let me thank our partners, the EU, Breakout Global, AAU, INHEA, for their, and all clusters, higher education cluster member for their continuous support on this higher education in focus series. Over to you, Elizabeth. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel, and thank you for providing that framework for the participants, which I think is quite important. I would now like to pass the floor to the Association of African Universities, which is not only an implementing partner of the HAQUA 2 initiative, but the AAU is also the co-coordinator of the CESA Higher Education Cluster. I believe Prof. Healy, the Secretary General, is with us today.
Yes, good afternoon to you all. This is Professor Etienne Healy, the Secretary General of the Association of African Universities. It is a pleasure to welcome you all to the current session of a series of webinars in the framework of CESA and the HAQUA 2 project. That you rightly said it earlier, AAU is part of the consortium to implement HAQUA 2 project, and the AAU is also the host of the higher education CESA cluster. Therefore, the presence of AAU in this forum is relevant, and I wish us all fruitful debates in the plenary sessions as well as the breakout sessions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Etienne. Pleasure. And as usual, we are very grateful for the fruitful relationship with the AAU, which is indeed the one continental African Association for Universities. I would like to now give the floor to our chair of today's deliberations, Dr. Charmaine Villet. Charmaine is the Dean of Faculty of Education at the University of Namibia. She is also the coordinator of a subcluster of the CESA Higher Education Cluster on curricula. The CESA higher education structure is a complex one. What you need to know is that it is divided in terms of its implementation and its follow-up. It's divided into a series of clusters. One of those clusters is dedicated to higher education, and we are working with a number of sub-coordinators of the higher education cluster to bring forward these dialogues with you. Charmaine is coordinating the one on curriculum and has put forth the program today. I would also like to just say that the transversal thread through these dialogue events that we are hosting is really the notion of better data for African higher education. We are using these dialogue events to feed into the process of setting up what will be called a policy data unit, which will be dedicated at collecting more coherent and relevant data on the higher education sector to inform policy making. This will be a process to assess how this unit can be best established. But we thought it was important to explore different thematic elements that are part of the CESA strategy, and to look also at how data is collected or not collected, where the holes are, where it can be improved, etc. So you will see in the breakout discussions, there will be an opportunity to tackle that topic as well. So without further ado, I would like to hand the floor over to Charmaine, who will introduce to you the format of today's meeting and provide you more thematic background on today's discussions. Charmaine, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you to all the speakers previously and for their kind words of support. I saw Jonathan was here as well, Jonathan Ba. I'm not sure if you would like to say something before I introduce the speaker, just to, is it okay? Or maybe, yeah, maybe.
Thank you very much, Charmaine. Thank you for giving me the floor. I'm happy. My boss, Professor Hile, the Secretary General, has already spoken. Just to say that we are happy that our CESA Higher Education Focus online events are moving on very well. The attendance at today's meeting have been very encouraging, similar to what we had last week. So we are happy that we are continuing with this discussion, and under your guidance and leadership, we'll be able to go through the event for today. So we are happy to have you on board. And as Elizabeth has mentioned, we want to see how the whole discussion fits into our data policy nexus, and how we'll be able to lay the groundwork for the development of the policy data unit in Africa. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and we hope that the discussion will be very fruitful. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. So as everybody has already indicated, this event is focused on preparing higher education students for a complex world, exploring the fluidity of teaching, learning, and curriculum post-COVID. For that event, we have a colleague who is going to be doing a presentation on this topic for the next 40 to 45 minutes, and I'm going to be introducing him in a minute. I just wanted to emphasize the format of this event. We will have this plenary session where we're going to be having this presentation, after which we will provide an opportunity for a few comments. You can also put your comments in the chat if you prefer it that way, but we will not spend a lot of time after the presentation, because you will have the opportunity to go and do some more discussion on these topics in thematic groups that will be done in the breakout groups. At the bottom of your screen, you will see there's a button that shows breakout rooms. Just to indicate to you, there will be 4 breakout sessions. The first one will continue in the plenary that breakout session that we have, or the plenary that we have now. That will be breakout session 1. And then 2, 3, and 4, you will have to then select from these by clicking on the button. So it will give you the opportunity to select a breakout session. You will also see in the chat, Eloy has put down there the different thematic discussions that will happen in the different breakout rooms. So just ensure that you know which discussion is happening in which room, and then just click on that, and then you will automatically be transported into that breakout session room. So having said that, let me just introduce our speaker for today. It's Professor Paul Henstad, is the founding director of the Houston H. Hart Center for Teaching and Learning at Washington and Lee University in Virginia. He has worked with dozens of universities on 4 continents to support curricular and pedagogical reform and innovation, including a Fulbright year helping Hong Kong University to move from a 3 to a 4-year tertiary model. He's the recipient of multiple teaching awards and has authored several books, including General Education Essentials and Creating Wicked Students, as well as Hong Kong, which is a travel memoir documenting his experience in Asia with his 3 small children. So Paul will do our presentation today. I hope you will really enjoy what Paul has to tell us. So Paul, it's over to you.
Thank you, Professor Villette. And thank you to all of the various commissions for the invitation to speak with this community today. As Professor Villette mentioned, I, among other things, I am a travel writer, and it's worth noting that the very first continent outside of North America that I visited was Africa, and I spent some time in both Tanzania and Malawi. So if there are any colleagues from there, please know that your presence here and my presence here and this opportunity to speak is really a very nice sort of homecoming in some ways for me. I'm very grateful to the Commission for this invitation. I am joining you today from as you can see, from my very modest office in Virginia. I actually don't even know where the background is from, but it felt like I've been, like everybody else, I've been working from home for the recent months, and having, it felt like I wanted to reconnect with the academic community in a sense of literature and books and ideas. So you've heard the title for my work. For my talk today, where I'd like to begin is simply by presenting to you these 5 terms on the right-hand side of your screen: poverty, migration, climate change, food insecurity, and education. My question for you, of course, would be, what do all 5 of these have in common? Now, since we're a room full of academics, it would be very easy for us to come up with probably a dozen different answers, maybe even more. Most people will recognize that the first 4, at least, are definitely problems, issues that we try to resolve. What complicates, of course, that reading of these is that 5th one, education, because, of course, for many of us, education feels more like a solution than a problem. And I'll unpack these in just a moment. In my mind, what they all have in common is that they are related to a particular kind of problem called wicked problems. I first encountered this term when I was working in Hong Kong about a decade ago. I was working with an engineering professor named Edmund Koh, who was Stanford University educated. And when I met him, he was at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. And he talked about the field of engineering, which had a particular kind of problems that students faced when they stepped out into the world after graduation. They were referred to as wicked problems. And what they were, problems where the dynamics were changing constantly, where the parameters were in flux, where the situation was very fluid. In addition, wicked problems were resistant to previous solutions. Things that had worked before weren't going to work this time. Further, oftentimes with wicked problems, the data is incomplete. We don't know exactly what is going on. In addition, sometimes there are competing viewpoints, both about how to solve the problem, but even sometimes about the existence of the problem. And you find this a lot in my home country, unfortunately, at the moment. Politically, we are so divided that we can't even agree about what is a problem. The problems must be solved. It is not optional. We can't simply step away from the question of water scarcity, for instance. And then finally, solutions for these problems are oftentimes going to draw from a variety of different fields. So if you think back to the issues I put up there, poverty, hunger, migration, you can see that they have these things in common. Finally, though, part of the point that I want to make, and part of the point that we're having this conversation now, is that we're living in a time where we are facing a very wicked problem. In fact, oftentimes when I introduce the concept of the wicked problem, people are confused and it's difficult. Now with COVID-19, everybody understands. Ever since this came out, it has been resistant to previous solutions. Ever since this has come out, we've been uncertain about how to solve it. It's like we're on a very long, very curving road, and we keep hoping to arrive at a moment of clarity where we go, now we understand, now we know what to do. I will point out as well that COVID-19 finally, to the extent that we are going to be able to solve it, it is going to be an interdisciplinary solution. It draws from the sciences, obviously, but politics very much comes into play. Sociology and human interaction very much comes into play. Cultures are coming into play. Language and the arts and how we communicate the message will definitely come into play. So part of the point I want to make is that this is a particular moment with COVID, and I'll address this more at the end of my talk, but we have a moment where we have clarity about the complexity of the world and the way that the world operates. The point I finally want to make is that we live in a complex world. We live in a wicked world where more than often than not, the problems we face are going to be of the wicked persuasion. Oftentimes this is because of the nature of the problems themselves. Oftentimes it's because our students may study one thing and then face something else. Or even if they study something and they learn it very well and then they go into the workplace is constantly changing. It's constantly evolving as well. There's new technologies, there's new clientele, there's new communication methods, and there's new communities that we're building and interactions that we're having with different people from different areas. So we live in a complex world. We live in a wicked world. And of course, as Edmund Coe, the engineering professor, would say to me, if my wicked engineering students are going to face wicked problems, they better have wicked competencies. My response to that is if all of our students are going to face wicked problems, they all better have wicked competencies. So what do we mean by that? Well, finally, we need to graduate from our universities students who are open to new challenges, who when they face a new problem, know how to stay calm, know how to think about it carefully, and don't freak out necessarily. They don't panic when they see this problem. They understand that new problems are how life works. That when they approach a problem, they're deliberate and thoughtful. We have lots of people who can respond, but simply responding without thinking is not going to be helpful. There needs to be a combination of courage. You're seeing something you haven't seen before, and you have to move forward, with humility, recognizing that you don't understand everything and that you need to think and you might need to do some exploration. You might need to reach out to other communities and other resources in order to solve these problems. Again, our graduates will need to be able to draw from multiple areas. They need to be able to draw ideas from one area and adopt it to another area. They need to not be afraid to fail, because when we face something we haven't seen before and that we hadn't anticipated, and we're going to try to solve it because we must try to solve it, it's not going to work every time. In fact, I would make the argument that more times than not, it's going to fail. I have a dear colleague in chemistry who says of everything else he wants the students to know, he wants them to know that 95% of the time he gets it wrong. And that every time he gets it wrong, it takes him a step closer to getting it right. So that failure is part of moving forward. And then, of course, the ability to try again when they do fail. The problem, and this is why education was included in my initial list, is that oftentimes education itself is not wicked, rather it's tame, which is again an engineering term. They talk about the wicked problems, and then they talk about the tame problems or the static problems. So too often when we are providing education to our students, the parameters of the challenges we put in front of them, or the problems we give it to them, or the literary text that we provide them, or whatever content we give them, oftentimes the parameters are static. The situation is not fluid, it's fixed. Oftentimes we are waiting for one definitive answer in our head. We have a sense of a right answer. Even when we don't have that sense of the right answer, sometimes our students assume that that we believe in a single answer and that their job is to find that single definitive answer, rather than recognizing that there might be multiple ways of approaching this and that it's valuable for them to explore those multiple ways. And then oftentimes memorization of a static answer is enough for a student to move on and perform really well. I'll talk later on about Hong Kong. One of the reasons that Hong Kong shifted its entire university system is because they were producing students who were very, very, very good at taking tests and performing very well on those tests. And the minute they faced a problem they hadn't seen before, they were at a loss. I'm obsessed with this world of wicked problems, so much so that I've written books about it. I write articles about it. Every time I think I'm done, something else comes up. And so what I want to do now for the next 15 minutes or so is simply explore how wicked problems might play out in the university setting. And I want to approach it on a variety of different levels. I want to begin with the level of the projects and the assignments and the assessments, even the exams that we give students. And oftentimes when we think about the assignments we give students, we make assumptions about who they should write to. We make assumptions about how they should approach it and what answer would be a good answer and what answer would be a bad answer. And I want to bring into play a dynamic where we also make assumptions about who has expertise. We assume that we're always the one that know, and they assume that they're the ones who do not know. So I want to mix that up a little bit and show some assignments that place students in the position of wicked participants, that force them to take some responsibility and play with fluid dynamics. So here's an example from biology. Now, several things make this wicked. This is, by the way, the prompt to the students. This is what the students are being asked to do. They will be choosing which region. So there's not a particular area that we necessarily have expertise. They could pick a part of Central America. They could pick a part of the Western United States. They could pick a part of Eastern Africa. They could pick a part of the Russian Far East. That's fluid. So they have to gain expertise in an area that we might not know anything about. In addition, though, they have to not just think about a simple answer based upon one set of criteria, but upon conflicting multiple areas that come together: economics, societal customs, cultural factors, environmental factors. All of these don't work together. They conflict each other. So they have to find a path that is complicated. Here's another example. Here again, the students are studying art. They oftentimes think about art as me expressing my ideas, but here they come in contact with a more complicated environment, a more complicated context. They have to think about the community needs. They have to think about how art can interact with the community needs. They need to think about what it is they're trying to do within the community. They need to think about how to get ideas from the community. They need to think about the mathematics and the budget and the economics of it. What I love about this assignment, when I encountered it, it occurred in a first year of university study. So students didn't go into the field of art thinking that art was simply about emotional representation. They recognized that it had all these fluid components coming together. Some of them worked well together and some of them did not. An example from the field of literature, my own field. 3 poems to help a grieving family. Here's what makes it tricky. These poems cannot be about death or grief. This is important because it shows that when I talk about oftentimes wicked problems require us to take ideas from one field into another field, that means we have to think about not just the content, the surface level meaning of the material, but how it operates on a conceptual level. So by saying you can't hand them a poem about grief, you have to think about how literature and art operates not just superficially, but conceptually, theoretically. It pushes them beyond the surface level meaning. And that ability to go beyond the surface level meaning allows students to move from one area to another and take ideas and methodologies from one area to another. That said, I think this is very important. This also asks them to still analyze the poetry. So they're still doing the normal work of a scholar in the field of literature. The same with all of the examples I'm giving. They're still doing the work of a biologist. They're still doing the work of an artist. They're simply doing it for a different audience. This feature of audience is also very important. If students are writing to us or performing for us all the time, there's a dynamic where they're here and we're here, which means that they know they can defer to our authority, to our knowledge, to our skills. What we want to do is create a dynamic where they're here and the audience to whom they're working with or with whom they're working is here, which means that they have to assume the authority. They have to become the expert. They can't defer. That assuming responsibility is really part of being an effective citizen in a complex, wicked world. We have to assume responsibility. We can't simply defer to other people's authority all the time. Sometimes we do. An example from evolutionary psychology. This is an important example because there isn't a right answer. We don't know how the brain is going to change cognitively or neurologically. The point is not, student, memorize the answer and hand it to me. The point is, here's a problem you haven't seen before. I want to see how carefully you can think about it. I want to see how carefully you can apply the methodologies of our field and try to respond to this problem. I'm looking at your process as much as I'm looking at your answer. We could have students have 5 different answers, just as, frankly, with literature, students can arrive at 5 different conclusions, or with statistics, students can arrive at 5 different conclusions, or with physics, students can arrive at 5 different conclusions. What matters is how carefully are you approaching this. There are going to be some answers that are better than others, but we want to see how carefully you can apply methodology and thoughtfulness as you're approaching an answer that hasn't been defined yet. Now, of course, if we're going to provide students with wicked exam questions and wicked projects, we're changing the rules of education on them. Oftentimes they get into university because they become very good at memorizing answers, at learning how to play by traditional rules. So if we're going to change the rules, we need to give them opportunities to practice in this new way, to think in this new way. Students are going to need to be able to practice wicked problems in ways where they can do it repeatedly, in ways where they have increasing independence, where we help them a lot at first and later on they have to do it very much on their own. They're also going to need to do it in situations where they can fail. Remember that last idea? Failure leads to greater knowledge, greater skill, the ability to get back up and try again. I spend a lot of time thinking about how we can create spaces in the classroom for failure. I was at an institution about 5-8 years ago where what you would find is almost in every class, in every field, they would require a 3,000-word paper for the final project in the course. And almost every time, those final papers were worth 70% of the final grade for the course. There's no room for failure there. When the risk is that high, when the consequences are that high, students are going to play it safe. We need to create situations where students can experiment, try new things, get it not quite right, rethink, reconsider, try again. I think to think about situations that are ungraded, where there is no grade, that are minimally graded, where there is a grade, but it's very small, or that are proportionally graded, which is to say that early on, the grade doesn't count for a lot. Later on, I'm assuming you're accepting more responsibility and you're becoming smarter and you've had a chance to practice, so it will count for more. A couple examples, and I won't spend too much time on these. In geoscience, we give them a rock sample early on. They've got to draw a relatively clear conclusion, and that's worth only 5%, so it's proportionally graded. Later, there's more complex data sets, and the work is a little harder for them to figure out. Those are worth 10%. And then later in the course, multiple conclusions. It's a complex data set, and it's worth a greater percentage. Okay, very simple idea. Early on, they can risk, they can fail. It won't destroy their grade. Later on, they're learning more. They have to apply the skills in more complicated situations, and the grade counts for more. A very simple thing that you can do in almost any field, something called a Monday morning problem or a Wednesday afternoon problem, or however you want to do it. But once a week, we come into class and we present them a complex, messy problem. students work in groups, we don't ask them to come up with a single solution to this problem. We ask them to come up with 3 different solutions, 3 different ways that you might approach this problem. This is really important because if students are going to try and not succeed, they need to be able to have backup plans, backup approaches. So we're getting to think in multiple ways rather than a single simple way. Then we list all of the solutions up on the board, and then we discuss as a class which one is best. Okay, so again, there's that emphasis on process rather than a single definitive answer. This is ungraded because it happens in the class in real time. And you can do this in any field. You could do it in literature, you could do it in mathematics, you could do it in political science even. In a literature classroom, oftentimes students have to write papers and it's really complicated, particularly since every professor is looking for something different. So here's a technique we could use in the literature classroom where students work in groups and they do short essays. And of course, collaboration, working with other people is also a complex, wicked skill. And then later on, they do a final essay that's individual, but they get multiple attempts to practice writing essays for this particular professor. And this, again, could occur in any classroom without a lot of consequences for them. Further, if we're going to do this, we have to have students have a clear understanding of why we're having them engage wicked problems. Now, there are 2 ways to approach this. One is to simply tell them. And there is increasing amounts of data. And I like that part of the goal of this process is to find ways to collect meaningful data. In the United States, we have an organization called the Association of American Colleges and Universities. Every 3 years, they survey employers asking them what they're looking for. And we come up with lists like this, which say just what are the main skills? And you'll see, if you look down the left-hand side of the screen, that a lot of these competencies are going to be wicked competencies, working collaboratively with a team, critical thinking, application in real-world settings, ability to demonstrate complex problem solving, ethical judgment. It's easy to solve a problem if you don't worry about ethics. But we must. We live in a world where ethics really matter. Creative thinking. So sharing this data with students is going to move them out of a simplistic understanding of what the world is going to require and what, therefore, education would require. The point I like to make, though, is telling students is effective, but not nearly as effective as having them live the experience, finding some way to have them occupy a wicked problem early on, to see what it's like to be in that problem and to see how these problems occur in the world. So there's some very obvious ideas that we oftentimes do already, internships or placements where they leave the university and go into the workplace. And what they'll find is that you can't think about things in a simplistic way. Undergraduate research, where students, even when they're undergraduates, are working in the lab with chemists, are working in digital research with humanists, are perhaps gathering and looking at statistical data with professors in political science or psychology. There again, what they see is that the cleanness oftentimes that we encounter in a textbook, or the simplicity that oftentimes they perceive in a lecture, it's more complicated than that. It's messier than that. And that messiness is actually normal. Simply bringing graduates back to campus and saying, talk about what your experience has been like. Talk about how the field works in the real world as opposed to how it might have worked here. But how else can we blur the lines between a static university? And I think it's worth noting a lot of the tame methodologies we engage, we do them out of necessity, right? We're working with large classes. I have to give a grade. That requires me to simplify. But it doesn't mean that it's a good structure. So how else can we do this? Well, on a curricular level, I'll give you the example of Worcester Polytechnic in Worcester, Massachusetts, here in the United States. Sophomore year, students are asked to work in a small group with a professor and take on a real world problem that comes from a sponsor in the real world. They spend all semester only on that problem. No other classes. It counts for 3 or 4 classes, but it's all that they do. And then they do something very similar their senior year. So you're taking the complexity of the world, rather than dividing a course schedule for a particular semester into 3 or 4 different classes, you're saying, here's how it all blends together. Here's how it all blurs. Groningen University in fact, all of the Dutch universities in the Netherlands also employ wicked problems very regularly in their curriculum. In fact, Groningen uses project-based learning. Students work collaboratively. They do this all 3 years. Every year of their university education, they encounter a wicked problem and they work on it in a group. And the problems are fascinating, dealing with refugees, for instance, neighborhood sustainability, designer human beings, thinking about how we might alter DNA while children are still in the womb in order to avoid particular problems or enhance particular skills. I like the very last one, sustainability and civil society on Mars. That's a perfect example of a wicked problem, right? There isn't a perfect answer. We don't necessarily know the answer. And it's not just about science. It's also about ethics. It's about politics. It's about sociology, how the world works together. It's also about psychology. So, sorry. And of course, all of this raises questions have to actually dramatically revise the entire university in order to respond to a wicked world. And there's a part of me that says perhaps we do. And again, I will refer to the example of Hong Kong. In 2000, Hong Kong did a survey of the employers in the region. And keep in mind that in Hong Kong, there is no agriculture, and there is no industry. It is a 100% service culture. What they found is that the employers were not satisfied with the Hong Kong university students who, as I mentioned earlier, were very good at responding to tests, but not good at facing problems that they hadn't seen before. So what they did is they shifted the entire university system for 7 million people, 8 different universities, from a 3-year system to a 4-year system that included this concept of general education, which implies that students not only study one area, they also have comprehensive breadth. So I may study literature, but I'm going to know some things about science, and I'm going to know some things about mathematics. And finally, they required that this be woven into the fabric of the 4 years, not just here are some foundational skills, get them out of the way, and then do the really important thing that is your major. No. You do general education and your major all along. They are of equal importance. It really was a rethinking of how education worked in Hong Kong. Now, I will point this out that in the United States, the term that we use for general education is the liberal arts. It derives from the Latin artis liberalis, which means the arts by which a person is free. And the concept is that a person not only can think and they know, but they can think and respond to situations they haven't seen before. And only then are you truly free, when you can think outside of the finite context. I will point out that as China has moved into, mainland China has moved into Hong Kong politics, that there are some questions about how they're responding to the liberal arts in Hong Kong. There is a recognition that when we're providing people with an education that not only gives them skills, but allows them to think and engage the world in meaningful ways, and to not just respond to the world, but to author and create new ways of thinking about that world. It is a challenge to some of the things that an authoritarian government might be looking for. And of course, the question is, how does this change our roles? One question is, how does this change our roles as professors? I've been in the classroom for 3 decades now. Will it require us to do less lecturing and sort of more guiding, less judging, as in my job here is to give you a grade, and more of my job here is to help you move from point A to point H? Perhaps less grading, more feedback. Are there ways to create student agency through partnerships? It's not just about me determining what we're going to do as a class, but how can we work together to determine that? And further questions about the university more broadly. What about the departmental structure? What about the graduation requirements? Is a single field enough, or is more needed? What about faculty agency? Where do faculty have a voice in this? If we're going to have students who have agency and can engage a complex world, can we do that if faculty have no or very minimal agency? Where do we create opportunities for faculty or administration or staff to fail and experiment? What role do teaching evaluations play? What role should they play? If we're asking faculty to change how the classroom operates with students, that means messing or playing around with student expectations. Students may not respond to that particularly well because the rules are changing and that can feel threatening. If that's the case, what happens when we're using a simplistic evaluation form of teaching? That said, I've worked with enough universities to know that if I end with these questions, something gets lost. So I want to return the focus to where it needs to be. Finally, yes, we've got university politics that are complicated and that we know we need to address. We've got colleagues that we know we are asking to think and rethink about who they are in relationship to teaching and their students and the university. Finally, though, this is about the students. So here are some other questions that I think need to be asked. Are there places where our students can be part of the conversation about designing their education? Perhaps for the entire institution, perhaps just within a department, perhaps just for a particular course, perhaps just for them. How else might we shift agency to students? Where can we ask students not just to receive information, but to create something in whatever field we're working in, any field? How can we ask students to connect ideas and make something, not just separate pieces of information, but a whole symphony of ideas that has meaning and impact? In a world where information can be gathered very quickly, some of it true, some of it not, how do we make learning, being in the classroom, reading a book, engaging in discussion, hearing a lecture, how do we make that not just information being passed from one person to another, but meaningful? And finally, how do we ensure that this happens for all students, not just the high-performing ones? It's very easy to design a curriculum that works for our great students. But I want to make sure the curriculum that works for our B students and our C students as well. So finally, our graduates are going to enter a messy, complicated world. They need to be able to engage in thoughtful, deliberate change. They need to recognize that they can't just accept the world as it is, that we have an obligation to move the world forward. A lot of our educational structures are tame, they're fixed, they're static. They don't match this complexity of the world, which shapes the students' expectations as they go into the world. We can change how we operate as an academy. We have to change. And here's the final point. COVID has given us a rare moment to do this. We've been forced to change how we deliver education. We've been forced to reconsider our students' needs at a particular moment, not just in terms of the information they're getting, but in terms of their wellness, in terms of their technological needs. All of these are in play. We've been forced to really rethink our content. I can't deliver as much virtually in 16 weeks as I can in person. So what information really matters? How am I going to assess what they've done and how effective that is? All of these have been called into question. When we think about the brain and we think about neuroscience, we're thinking about the malleability of the brain. We know that when we're younger, our brains are very malleable. They shift very quickly. Well, that's true of us as a profession as well. When the profession was being formed, how we thought about learning and how learning worked could shift very quickly. Now we've oftentimes fallen into traditions. We've lost that malleability. Sometimes they're good traditions. Sometimes they're good habits. Sometimes they're out of necessity, but sometimes they're not. This is a moment where we can question why we do things, how we do things, and where we might go in order to do it better. I am so grateful that you have allowed me to be part of this conversation. And thank you for your patience. My apologies for the length of my talk. I will turn it over to Professor Villette and we can have some conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul. That was very insightful and very thought-provoking. Thank you so much for that presentation. I think if there are anyone who has a comment, we can spend maybe the next 5 to 10 minutes on any comments that you may have. You can raise your hand under the button that shows the reactions at the bottom of your screen, if you have any. Then please do that, and I will recognize you. If not, I don't see any hands raised. Oh, I see there's one. Okay, two hands raised. Can we hear from Paul Ayuon? I hope I'm saying that correctly. Paul, please unmute yourself. Paul Ayuon, please unmute yourself and go ahead with your question.
Can you hear me?
We can, yes. Please go
Okay.
ahead.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much. That was a very interesting presentation. And I keep thinking about all the discussions, agendas, and the curricula that we operate in Africa on the continent as a whole at the tertiary level. And it is sad that in all our initiatives, we tend to forget a significant proportion of students with disabilities who are on campuses throughout Africa. And yet, in our policy discourses and agendas and curricula, we do not factor the learning of these students into our curricula. Our university administrators often marginalize students with disabilities and faculty with disabilities. And we've been doing this forever. And I'm beginning to wonder, even before COVID, and now that COVID is ending, we will never catch up with meeting the learning needs of these growing numbers of students with disabilities on our campuses. And I'm beginning to wonder, when is the AAU and other continental bodies going to begin to think, serious thinking of how we have marginalized 20% of students with disabilities who are on campuses throughout higher institutions in Africa? So that's my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. So I don't know if Paul will be able to answer that, but we will put that on the, we will take note of that. Robert Awua, please, Robert, can you please keep it short and to the point, please?
Sure,
Please go
sure. Paul, this is just a quick question for Paul. With your, I can see your background now. In terms of ability to perform as a student who graduate from any university here in the US, any part of the world, and also in Africa, what do you see to be the most significant difference in terms of the ability to go out there and really function?
Repeat the last question. The most significant difference between an African graduate and the last bit?
Let's say a student from the US. Let's say two students, one from, they are all in engineering, African graduate, US graduate universities. What do you see to be the most significant? And I'm talking of the wiki professor concept that you presented.
Mm-hmm.
What are we doing wrong in Africa? And that is making our students so bad in terms of their ability to function.
Paul, before you answer, maybe you can just note that, and then I've got two more hands, and then maybe we can then just take all of those together. There's Louis Adekola.
Hi. Hi, everyone. My name is Louis Adekola, actually, and I just wanted to say that was a really, really brilliant presentation, Prof. Thank you for sharing. I personally feel very concerned because of course, I've done my first degree and I did a master's in Nigeria before I went to the UK for another master's in education. And I feel that the problems that we have in the higher education system in Africa is very complex. But if we keep thinking that these problems are consistently complex and we don't start taking action towards them, it will stay that way. And I'm just trying to say that with all this presentation that we've heard today, it's really indeed a call to action for everyone. And it's really important that professors begin to see themselves less as oppressors, less as superpowers or superheroes in the higher education system in our country. And I'm glad that a lot of lecturers are here present. So from the students to the professors, to the university, we just need to start finding a way to solving these problems, no matter how little they are. We can't just keep piling these potential solutions together and assuming that in the future it will work out. I don't have a question. I just wanted to say that that was a great presentation and I hope we can take it and run with it.
All right, thank you, Louis. And then finally, we will have Olivia. Olivia, please, can you pose your question?
Thank you very much. It's Olivia from the Council on Higher Education, South Africa. Paul, thank you very much for an insightful and thought-provoking presentation. My question is, I'm actually just wondering, universities are complex organizations and very, in most cases, very conservative. What you are proposing is a shift in thinking. Actually, it's about teaching the students how to think, irrespective of the content or the subject matter. How do we get the institutions to make the shift? It will be a lot easier for one disciplines, but others it will be a lot more complex. How do you get the universities or the higher education institutions to make the shift? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivia. I'm going to allow just one more person, Andrew, and then I'm going to ask the rest of the people, please do put your questions or your comments in the chat, and then Paul will address them.
Hello, my hand was up. My hand was up.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of people with hands up, and we're just trying to manage the time. Okay, Momo, if you can keep it just really very short, Andrew very short, and Dr. Bridget very short, so that Paul can just respond very quickly to all of us. Okay, and that's going to be it. Then we move into the breakout sessions.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Paul, thank you very much. My name is Momo Yakubu. I'm at Texas Southern University in Houston. I've been an alumni of Carnegie Fellowship for 3 times. And all the points you highlighted are well taken. And I try a lot to be able to help in curriculum development that focuses on students and to follow the dynamic of the changing world, like you call it, which is a wicked world. But if we have a wicked world and we're not preparing our students to be wicked in tackling the problem, then we'll continue to be in the same situation we found ourselves right now. But unfortunately, is that the structure that we have in the African universities and by African government make it a lot difficult for us to give our students the best. One of them is the perennial strike, especially like, for example, in Nigeria. The faculty are on strike forever. The government is not ready to do anything. And then at some point, the faculty are not even ready to accept any arrangement to be able to help the student, and which make curriculum that targets and focus on student meeting the outside world to solve African problem is is one of the most challenging that is out there. So how are we going to be able to come up with a plan to be able to help these students to do and get hands-on? Our students are very smart, but they are not exposed to the wicked solution that we need for our problem.
Very smart.
You know,
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Momo. Andrew, and then Dr. Bridget, and then Paul will give you a couple of minutes to respond. Andrew?
Okay, yeah. Thank you for the nice presentation. But I have just a short question. How do we develop curriculum as teachers to cater to students with variable learning capabilities? There are students who are sharp. There are those who are kind of slow. What do we do to come up with curriculum that we can cater to this wide variety of learning capabilities?
All right, thank you, Andrew. And then Dr. Bridget is the final person. Okay. Can you please unmute, Doctor? Your mic is mute.
All right, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. I'm Dr. Thibault Bridget from the University of Massachusetts in Dartmouth, USA. I really enjoyed the presentation. My question has to do with what Olivia had mentioned in terms of the university being very conservative and that the need for a paradigm shift to get students to think is something that we need to focus on. The question that I have is, how do we create that kind of environment and space that gives students more voice and more resources? Because I think the universities, especially in Africa, and also here in the US, inherited a colonial system that is so strict and regimented, and that students quite often are not given the proper resources and attention that they need. And so how can we give voice to students? How can we get more students to think for themselves and not regurgitate what we've been teaching them? And also, how do we make sure that we revamp the curriculum to, especially in Africa, the curriculum that will meet African development needs? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Paul, it's over to you.
Okay, how long do you want to give me?
You have 5 minutes, but you can address
Okay.
some of these issues again at the end. I'm sorry.
Right.
Just trying to manage.
No. Given that, I'll try to do sort of short answers, and then people will be able to work in groups, and maybe we can come back for some longer discussion. Robert's question: difference between African students and Americans or U.S. students. I would say, frankly, and we've got colleagues from 2 American universities here, it sounds like as well. American universities are struggling with these same problems. We are struggling with students who come in thinking that education is all about memorization of answers and that there's a right answer and a wrong answer all the time. Sometimes there is. American universities have sometimes very top-down administrations who are making decisions without paying attention to the voices of the faculty and the voices of the students. American universities oftentimes have political bodies that are interfering with, in an attempt to help, or sometimes in an attempt to direct and control what's happening at universities. So I don't know that there is a difference. I will, though, approach it as well by thinking about Andrew's question. How do we deal with differential levels? A lot of the work that I'm doing on wicked problems derives from George Kuh, K-U-H, his work on high impact practices. These are things like internships, undergraduate research, first-year seminars, e-portfolios, that we know that the more students encounter them, the better they are at critical thinking and problem solving when they leave the university. What it shows us, his research in that area shows us, it helps all students improve. It helps less traditionally high-performing students improve even more. So by bringing the wicked problems of the world and the complexity of the world into play, oftentimes it helps students engage education in ways that are more meaningful, rather than it being a game of, I will take the information you give me and hand it back to you, which seems useless. It feels like a real world application, which makes greater sense. So this can actually help lower performing students even more. Olivia and MoMA's questions, what I'm going to say is, in terms of how do we turn the ocean liner of higher education, it's difficult, and it's going to require work at all levels. And one level, go out, survey employers, find out what it is they really need from the students that they're hiring from African universities. Because when you have that data, you can then pivot to the politicians and say, you're asking us to do this, but here's what the employers want. And here's what the employers need. Here's what the world we live in demands right now. So that's part of it. But I don't want to make education only about employment, because it's not. I study literature. I study poetry. It's also about the development of the students. So in terms of engaging, I think what we need to work on within the university is creating pockets of change. Faculty who think about things similarly, who are engaged with these wicked problems, for whom these wicked problems make sense, and who want to change their classrooms. Can we find ways for those faculty on a campus to collaborate together, to share ideas, to voice and share with what they're doing with colleagues from other departments, and simply grow change that way? We know from general data, at least within the American context, that usually you're going to have 20% who will adopt any change, 20% who will resist any change, and 60% in between who are waiting. So find the 20% who are going to adopt the change and help them adopt it, and then help them communicate how they adopted it and the impact of it to the 60%. The other 20%, love them dearly. They are our colleagues, but they will do what they're going to do, and we're not going to worry about them. Bridget's question about student voices is really important. And it's more, I don't know that I have a simple answer that I can give in 1 minute, other than to say student voices are incredibly valuable. Faculty oftentimes don't hear student voices enough. Administration oftentimes don't hear student voices enough. I would really encourage bringing alumni back to the university to share what life is like after university, and to share what things really worked and what things really mattered versus the things that they thought mattered at the time, but turn out that they didn't matter so much. I mean, I have a colleague, a good friend who works in HR in engineering, and she's learned not to hire straight A students in engineering anymore, because they think that only taking the test matters. When they get into the real world, they learn that risk matters. So bring those voices back, make sure that the students are hearing those voices, and then make sure that the students have opportunities to share their ideas as well. 5 imperfect answers, I apologize to everybody, but I know we want to move the conversation along.
And thank you, Paul. Great response. Thank you. I think we're going to be breaking into our breakout sessions now. You will find at the bottom of your screen there are these breakout rooms that you can choose. The group 1 will remain in this room where we are. And group 1 will be discussing how the boundaries between the static university and the fluidity of the global world can be broken and changed. The group 2 will talk about the curriculum. How can we get curriculum that can respond to this? Where do we get the data of universities where this is working, or what should be in this curriculum? So you will be discussing that in group 2. Jan will be your facilitator there. Group 1, Pam will be your facilitator. Group 3 will be discussing students and how do we change that kind of mindset so that our students can respond to these complex issues. And then group 4 we'll be discussing academics and what is it that we as academics need to do to create these possibilities for our students. So please just choose between 1 and 4.
So Charmaine, I'm trying to join. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, I'm also trying to join and I am struggling. I don't know what
Charmaine,
I'm...
you will be hosting the first group, so you need to remain here.
You stay where you are. That's true. I just, okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you.
Why is the group 1 team? Why is the team for group 1?
You
the
are
group
in
1
it now.
needs to remain in this room.
What is the title of the group 1 team?
It's on the chat. You have all the information now on the chat.
Okay.
No, it's not. Group 1 is not showing up.
No, group, all the people who wants to join the group 1, just don't
stay.
select, just stay.
But what will be the discussion point?
It's a static university learning and weak fluidity of the global world.
Okay.
It's I think you can see it in the chat.
Please, how do I join?
Good afternoon, Group 4.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for joining the group.
Afternoon. Afternoon.
Thank you. I'm CK Haihambo, and I'll be facilitating this group. And maybe while we are waiting for the others to join, I just would like to know who our presenters are in this group and whether they're present so that we can just organize the house a little. Is anyone here presenting? Not yet.
Hi, colleagues. There is a facilitator for this group who should be joining. I believe it is Dr. Cynthia Halhambo. It's just, is she here?
Yes, I am here.
Okay, wonderful, Cynthia. So you can go ahead and get started whenever you're ready.
Okay. I'm actually ready, and I asked the group if anyone in the group wants to say something about the topic so that we can kick off. I will present the topic now. It doesn't seem like it, so let me introduce the topic then. Just give me a second. In the meantime, we are also giving a bit of time to people who are still joining and confused about where to go. Let's pause presentation. I got lost. Good. Our topic today is about academics, the way we teach and the way we allow our students to learn. And we've had a very good presentation from Paul on how we can think and rethink these issues. So I want to start by provoking comments on what we gathered from the presentation before we go to the next step. So I'm inviting anyone who has a comment on academics, the way we teach and the way we learn, and especially focusing on the question of what do we need to change, basically, in higher education. Template which I don't want. Okay, the main question is, maybe if people did not get it, what are the questions we as academics need to ask about teaching and learning in higher education, and what possibilities have we not considered so far? So what are the
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Madam Chair, please look at the chat box where you have the hands. There are a lot of people that have raised their hands. You can call them to respond.
Oh, okay. Let me go to the chat box. Or to the reactions, rather.
You actually should be able to see the hands already on the screen of the individuals who raised them.
I'm only seeing...
See Dr. Alusula, Oyewole, Eurita, Monica.
Yeah, probably I can speak. I'm Olushola Iwole.
Okay.
Yeah, I find that it's a traditional system of teaching and learning in many African universities has been teacher-centered. There is a need for many universities to change, many academics to change their teaching or learning system from being teacher-centered to be learner-centered. And based on the presentation that we received today, we also need to modify, review our curriculum regularly to reflect the needs of the time. And from the presentation of today, you find that there will be need for us to inculcate workplace learning in our curriculum so that our graduates will be more relevant to the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. So it's the traditional approaches that we're using, basically, that we need to relook and change of curriculum regularly. Regularly meaning every 5 years, every now and then. Who else can see hands? How come I can't see hands today?
I can speak.
Yes,
Roslyn. Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Roslyn Okech. I'm with the Memorial University out here in Canada. For me, I wanted to look at a few different issues, things to do with access, because if you're talking about changing curricula, I think there needs to be discussion about access. There is a lot of issue of inclusivity, especially out here in the West. We need to look at costs, because with every change of curricula, there has to be costs. Some of our public universities, especially in Africa, are heavily dependent on budgets. And so if we are going to do a huge change or a huge shift, we have to consider costs. And then we also have to consider quality. What quality do you want to have within our institutions so that when the students graduate, they're all around. And finally, there's something that made me think about just even with my last class in this semester. I had a student who actually mentioned it to me. We were doing some practical in class, and I'd given them some project to do. And she mentioned that she is not very good at tests, but she's very good at experiences. So there are those students in the class who are theoretical, and there are those students in class who are more experiential. So we need to discuss on how we are going to create a balance for these students going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roslyn. I see, now I can see hands.
I can go?
Yes, I'm seeing Monica Onyango.
Thank you very much. My name is Monica Onyango. I work for Boston University School of Public Health. And my input to this topic, I feel, is a broader issue, not just for the professors, but I think the whole system needs to be changed, because you find that our colleagues who teach in African universities, they're overloaded with work. You find that sometimes they teach a classroom of more than 200 students. So in that environment, it's very, very difficult to be able to implement some of the things which were presented. And I agree with what Roslyn has mentioned in terms of access, quality, and being able to provide different experiences. But if the environment of doing that is not enabled, then the professors are also not able to provide those kinds of experiences. So you have 1 hour, you go into class, you have 200 or over students. It's impossible to be able to provide them with this experience we are talking about. So personally, I think the whole system needs to be overhauled and to consider all those other points of access, quality, and experiences which you've talked about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica. Who's the next? Eureka?
Yes. Thank you very much. It's good afternoon from Zimbabwe. Yes, I'm with Zimbabwe Open University, and I've been really charmed by the professor's presentation. And it is true that COVID-19 changed the way we teach, the way our students learn, and we have been forced to adjust. As things stand at Zimbabwe Open University, which I assume to be the same with the other universities, maybe in Zimbabwe or even beyond, we have now taken the approach to teaching and learning to be blended learning, whereby there is infusion of face-to-face where it's possible, but generally we have resorted to visual ICT, technologically enabled teaching and learning, which means the curriculum has been forced maybe to change because we are looking at how the students need to benefit from what we had set out to be the kind of knowledge that we would assume that somebody then to qualify or to come out having graduating with a particular qualification, one should have gone through a kind of process. And yet that is no longer the same. So actually the presentation by Professor Paul is actually confirmed that things are no longer the same. But of course, in Zimbabwe, we have been worried about the quality, as the former speaker said, quality of learning by students who are out in the rural areas, who may not have access to the ICT gadgets and may be limited in resources, getting resources themselves, such as laptops, smartphones, and other accessories. And so we as a university, we are still thinking how we can accommodate the teaching and learning for such students. But all the same, we have been challenged that what we used to talk about as teacher-student ratio has to change. And if the learning is now centered on the individual as we got it from the presentation, it means that the ratios, even the 1 to 200, may not matter, because what we are to do is to make sure that we facilitate, we are to shift the weight of the learning to the student by providing what is appropriate within the circumstances of individual learners. And so it is a new look, new thinking, which we are challenged, and some of the things may not remain the same. And actually, COVID-19, yes, forced us to adjust in one way or the other. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. That was Eureka. Andrew, what would you like to share with us?
Yes, I think I really agree with the last speaker there about technology, access to technology, and how that can help our curriculum and everything else. I've been teaching here at Iowa State University since 2001. And I can say I've taught about 15,000 students and counting in three related courses. Now, my course philosophy is that the students has to be in charge of their own learning. I'm a referee, I'm a coach standing on the sideline, and if there's a problem, I shout at you and say, hey, let's do it this way. And what it took was developing something I call and I'm a soil scientist, and you can see my book, it's called the Individualized Learning of Soil Science, where we put the students in charge. And I'm not there teaching to the upper level students. I'm looking at students who are just at the bottom and bringing them up to the point that when at the end of the semester, we are at the same level. Now, if we can, even these days, my grandchildren in 5 years old, they have these little tablets, and I think they know more about this tablets than I do. Now, is it possible for us to help Africa by providing these basic tablets that students can stay on their own, do the work, but then it is also take the responsibility of the teachers to develop the course material. Now, I have short videos, 5 minute maximum on different sections that students can look at, and then they have review materials, and then they have access to ask questions. So it makes it very easy for students who don't want to talk in the classroom to talk to you online, and then you are them. But it's a lot of collaboration. It takes the government, it takes the college administrators, it takes the will of the professors to put in the time and always tweak the system so you are not static. It makes it easier to do it that way. And I think I've been trying to sell this to some of my colleagues back home. Some adopt some parts of it, others resist it. But I'm hoping we can do this. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm also apologizing for calling you by your first names. It seems it is easier and faster. Arinza, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Amanekwe.
You did excellent job. You did an excellent job pronouncing that name. Good job.
Thank you. Please share your ideas.
From Nigeria here. amazing talks from everyone. You will realize that the education system, higher education system in particular, cannot just change on its own, that we need people to really drive it. So my belief is, just like Professor Paul mentioned during his presentation, that we don't get to hear student voices. That's the truth. And because students come and go, but he was talking about the alumni body, which you can actually leverage. But I feel that if we really want to make a change in the system, it means that we have to have a mindset shift. A mindset shift, particularly on the side of the academics, that is the professors, the teachers, the lecturers, or whatever it is called here in Africa. So we need to start bringing in people, or we need to start reorientating ourselves as to what exactly should we be expecting students to become? What exactly, or what's the best way to teach students? We shouldn't be teacher-centered, but we should be learner-centered. So mindset shift, saying that, oh, because you failed this course, you're a failure in life. Mistakes are part of learning. So a mindset shift is really important. So that is also going to inform the delivery. So talking about delivery, a lot of things has to come to play. So it's very easy to deliver a lecture in a classroom, but it is not easy to say, oh, let us have a project. It is not so easy because a lot of things will have to come in as factors, one of which is funds has to come in as factors, availability of materials when it comes to coming up with projects. So some departments can actually fly without having to do a lot of experiments, for instance, the education or the managerial sciences. But when it comes to the science work, you do a lot of experiments and the likes. So it means that a lot of funds have to come into place. And then I believe that in academic teaching and learning, we have to teach from our own experiences. So a lot of university professors do not have the experience that can actually motivate students. So we've had, COVID has come, and then there's proliferation of technological devices everywhere. It still hasn't solved any problem. That is not even changing things. It's only changing the way, or I mean, the tools of learning. That is the only thing that has changed. But mindset has not changed, and experience is still there. So you can only teach. Imagine you're teaching a course on accounting, and you've never been an accountant before. You can imagine what it means. So a student will be in the classroom getting theories upon theories. All of these has to change. So we need people who are business leaders. We need people who are industry leaders or leaders in that particular field that they teach to teach in universities. We need to stop having people who always write empirical works. All of these have to stop. All of this has to stop, or maybe not stop, but then we have to minimize or give a chance. I think that's a better word. Give a chance to people who have industry experience to teach students. That way, we can say, oh, my student is becoming this, and I can actually monitor how that student is achieving, is getting to that destination. But if we continue to place so much emphasis on theory, then it means that students will not be able to solve problems, practically. My name is Arinze, and I identify with Advantage Africa and Uni Research Hub. So what we do is that we help universities to become better through the advancement unit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's insightful indeed. Let's take Adewale Obadina before we hand over to our co-host Elizabeth if she has some ideas she wants to add or summarize. Adewale?
Thank you very much. I'm not able to raise my hand. I can't see that icon. Can I just make a quick comment after the current speaker? Just a quick short comment. Yes, please.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
I'm Adewale. I lecture at the Department of Food Science and Technology, Federal University of Agriculture, Abeokuta in Nigeria. I want to say that who determines if the students are being taught the right thing or not? Who determines if the students are getting what they are supposed to get? Who determines if the lecturers, the professors, are really impacting the students? And my answer to this is the industry. So as that, I want to say that in Africa, we should follow an example that the presenter gave to us about the scenario that happened in Hong Kong. The government have a role to play. There is need to do a survey, which is going to be a collaboration between the industry and the academic. And this leads us to industry-academic collaboration. We need to ask from the industry, are we doing what they expect from us? Most of the time, they are the ones that get the students. They are the ones that employ the students. Are we giving to them what they expect us to do? So I think there is need to do this. And also I want to suggest that if there is a good collaboration between the academic and the industry, it's going to create an avenue for the professors to also have opportunities to visit the industry, maybe on sabbatic or short program. In Africa, that aspect is lacking. The industry do not really believe in Africa academic system. And that is why you see that most of the time when the professors, academic, want to go on sabbatic, they have to go to another university. So if there is a way to establish that linkage between the industry and academic, it's going to assist a lot in changing the curriculum and in helping to empower the students. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those insightful comments and suggestions. Let's give Mungai Mutonya a chance.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll be brief. My name is Mungai Mutonya. I'm based at Washington University in St. Louis, but I'm currently in Nairobi. I just arrived yesterday for a Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship project with the University of Nairobi. My take is, as a linguist, is that I actually agree with what everybody else has said. The need for a paradigm shift, the need to reimagine the community, and also to empower our students and to make the experience meaningful. But I think also we also need to think about using local languages. We have yielded our field of research in the communities to foreign researchers. And I think if we want to make learning much more meaningful to our students, I think it's imperative that we engage or we think about teaching the local languages, African languages that they are doing in Europe, in Asia, and elsewhere, and we don't do that.
Thank you, Mungai.
What could have been controversial. I've got there's a little funny story about that. And then what were interesting cases. And sorry, the last speaker was talking about the African Center of Excellence, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, just to make sure I've got the correct, yeah. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you very much for everyone who contributed. It's appreciated.
Okay, thank you. Are we all back?
Yes.
Okay, so group 1 is back. Group 2 is back. Group 4, I just heard Cynthia. Group 4 is back. Group 3 and 2, are you back?
We are back. Group 2
We are
is
back, but we started late, so we didn't, didn't do much.
Okay, can I just also remind people that the chat is there. You can also put your your comments in the chat. I noticed that we have gone from 100 to 73, so I think people would like to get this webinar over, and so that they can move on. I know it's kind of late, so I'm going to ask the facilitators to please, just 2 minutes each, just give us the key issues that you think we need to consider for future, particularly as it pertains to where are the good things happening, what kind of data do we need to collect in order to make sure that we can devise policies around these issues that are evidence-based, and then, of course, what kind of evidence is already available. If you could just briefly treat your feedback in that way, if it's possible. Thank you. So let me go to group 1 first, Pamela.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So so let me just do that quickly. So just quickly, where did I go? Okay, so we're just looking at what issues did we agree upon. So it's definitely time to shift. Everybody's on board with this. This is a good way to go. Paul, we were very inspired by your presentation, and so people have also found that already there's collaboration with other universities that is taking place. So universities that have already had a chance to test, and I'm just putting in brackets, WICET, those partnerships can be a springboard to start off with. Also, someone mentioned the fact that most universities have a community engagement factor that staff are, so it's not too far a stretch to say, so how can we really do this and accelerate this to include the concept of WICET? And then, of course, nothing happens without policies in place. So there has to be policies, and even if there are people who are resistant, the 20% people are resistant and people are still waiting, at least the policy supports those who are willing to put the ball into role. And then, of course, the stakeholders are important for collaboration and partnerships. You know, if we're going to create a WICET problem, then we have to say, who are we working with? Who are outside people, outside of our university, who are the ministries, who are the community people that we're going to work with? And so the collaboration is important, and they must be brought into the policy framework from the start. Then, not that it was controversial, but someone mentioned that the term WICET might be a problem for some of us Africans. Okay, and then what cases that were shared? We have AAU, and people were saying that it works better if it comes from, instead of people from this platform going to the university and say, oh, we have this brilliant idea. AAU, as they are part of this forum, should be pushing for the implementation with the VCs in the loop from the beginning. And I know that there is going to be, what we are saying today is going to be part of a future a workshop with the vice chancellors, or meeting with the vice chancellors. So, and then there's a current collaboration with Carnegie, for example, with African countries, that where there is fantastic collaboration, and these are where things are happening, and the countries can collaborate with this from who knows, and yeah, people who know and people who don't, who might not know, but that is already working. And so you're starting from a point of, instead of having to look for people to support us. And then And then very importantly, as our last speaker said, there are great things happening in Africa already. And we just need to highlight these things that are happening, these brilliant things that are happening, and use those as best case scenarios, best examples, so that it is not just something that is coming from outside, but that things are already happening here, and we need to share these ideas. That's what we had to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Pamela from Group 1. Great ideas. I think there was something that I really liked also in Group 1 was the lady who spoke from South Africa, I think it's Olivia, who talked about quality assurance in her country, but I think maybe we could consider maybe across the continent, the rigidity of how people have to submit their programs and the way that it's packaged may also be contributing to the rigidity that we see happening in university teaching and learning and curricula. So I think that's also a very important issue that she brought up. So I just wanted to add that. Can we go to Group 2? 2 minutes, please. Thank you.
Well, Pamela, you set the bar high by having a nice PowerPoint, but if you stop
I just need to take it out.
That won't distract the group.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I just was writing notes. Thank you for that comment, and it builds on what we were talking about in our group when we were talking about curriculum, that there are already some really good things that are happening across the continent. And I want to summarize what the important things are when we think about curriculum, highlight where it's happening, and then some challenges we discussed. So the idea, there is an importance of redesigning curriculum, really working at the department and faculty level and with stakeholders in that part, talking about a competency-based rather than just content, having a very clear mission so that it's clear to accreditation, which was seen as a barrier, that's of what is happening. The talk about moving forward from what we learned in the pandemic, providing practical experiences for our students, not just online content delivery, and a hands-on focus to what's going on. And one of the things we learned is that in Kenya, there are things already happening. Judith shared the idea of changing what they're doing, making it competency-based with very clear outcomes. So it really is creating opportunities for students to become thinkers and problem solvers, and the idea of wicked students that Paul described. In Ghana, they're working, I believe it is with the Carnegie Foundation, but with professors and working to train professors to be impactful in their teaching, because they probably went through a much more colonial-based system. So the idea of these new PhD candidates that are going through the university, really working with them to provide impactful instruction. In Namibia, Helena talked about transformation of curriculum already, and we pushed her to talk about what does that look like, and the idea of creating an internship for everybody where they get to apply what they're learning and come back and figure out how to make adjustment. Also problem-based courses. Some challenges that people talked about was just overcoming the barriers of a colonial legacy of institutions. Also talked about accreditation, which seemed to happen in the first group of how do you overcome some of the stringent rules that might occur in accreditation and get the accrediting boards to think differently. And I think that's my 2 minutes. And I think, we
Thank you very much, Jan. Group 3.
Thank you very much. Sorry, unfortunately we started very late because we couldn't join earlier our group, and I would like to request my co-facilitator to report, and I will be able to fill in if there's any gap.
Was that Saki?
Yes.
Saki, can you come in, please? Dr. Prof. Ipinge, yes. Please go ahead, you are unmute. We can see you. Okay, while he's doing that, can we go to group 4 and then maybe you could just see what is happening with his sound. Group 4, can you do your presentation, please? And then we'll go back to group 3.
Yes, thanks, Dean. Our group confronted the question of what we need to do differently, given the presentation we had from Professor Paul. And our suggestions or discussions went around came to the following recommendations. Some are recommendations, some are just issues to think about. The first one was that we need to change or shift from traditional teaching and learning. And we also said that we need to consider inclusivity in terms of access, cost, and all other forms of diversity, so that we can enable more or all the students to actually benefit from quality education, quality higher education. We also looked at the question of overloaded classrooms in Africa that might hamper the implementation of the new ideas that we talked about in the main lecture, issues like project-based learning and internships and so on. People made reference to classes that are as large as 200 students and more. Then the issue of blended learning that was mostly ignited by COVID-19, that it has its benefits, but it also has come with exclusion of students who do not have access to internet devices, etc., etc. Then we should put students in charge of their own learning by allowing student voices, and us as faculty taking a position of mentors, supporting their learning and not really be the ones that are driving the whole idea of teaching and learning. And we need a mindset change. Faculty need to change their mindset, and we also need to ask ourselves the question, who should decide what to be taught? And actually the presenter, they answered the question by saying, let's follow the idea that was presented about Hong Kong of collaboration with industry, where our students are mostly employed, and learn from them what should be the content and context of higher education. And the last the idea of teaching from experience. We need to have faculty that know what the experience in the field looks like, and not just have someone who comes with a PhD, but they have never worked in the field that they're teaching, so that you can step a little bit away from that empirical approach. Then the last one was that we need to think about teaching in our own languages, local languages, and teaching about them. So that was basically the key ideas of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Humble. Can we get group 2? Sorry, group 3, are you ready?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, thank you. We looked at on the topic on how to prepare the students to better understand the or to navigate in the complexity of the world beyond the outside walls of the academy. In discussing this overall question, I think quite a number of points were brought up. The first one was that if we want the student to fit and to understand the the world they are living in, universities or education must provide opportunities for students to see a big picture. There was an example of courses that are being taught, but students do not link them to the real life, or to they don't see the relevance of some of those courses. So students need to understand how to fit in the big picture. So we need to provide that opportunity. Another point that was mentioned is that university educators or lecturers have a big role to play. So we need to do things differently, not just, teach a curriculum. For example, bringing professionals from the industries or from the private to come to the campus to engage the students, and in that way they will provide the real life experience. And there was also another example that was given, I think, in East Africa, where they look or teach their students through extracurricular activities. In that way, the students are able to provide network, engage in the seminar, and discuss issues related to integrations and so on within the region. Also, another important point that was mentioned was that students must see the connection between the university. There must be a connection between.
Okay. Thank you. I think we lost Sakib there. But yes.
Okay, no, somebody muted me. I don't know who.
Okay. Okay, please, can we wrap up, because the interpreters have to leave. We are already over time. Can we just wrap it up?
Yeah. So another point that was mentioned is that there must be a connection between the private sector and the university. So private sector must be willing to come on board, maybe fund some programs, fund research, and help the student to see the real world. Another point that was mentioned was that academic policies in our university are more concentrating on teaching and learning, and not much on community outreach. Another point that was mentioned, if we want to help the student, is to restructure our curriculum and programs. Too much content knowledge, and in most cases, this content knowledge is a bit not current. So we need to look at our curriculum, how we structure it, and so on, if we want to prepare the students. So I will leave it like this. Maybe these notes will be provided later.
Okay, thank you very much. I do believe that we need to wrap this up. Thank you so much, Group 3, for your contribution. The sessions are all recorded, so all these recordings will be on the website, so people will be able to access that, and there will also be a report made available for this whole event. Can I ask Paul to maybe take some 5 minutes for final words before we conclude? Paul, it's your floor.
Sure. Thank you very much. I don't think I'll need 5 minutes, actually. The conversation that I just heard was, I thought, very much, I mean, the phrase in the United States is nailed down, so hit perfectly the target about some of the ideas and some of the challenges of what needs to happen. Very, very thoughtful, very inspiring, and I'm very grateful to be to have been asked to be part of this conversation. The only things I would sort of highlight or foreground as I will, and just highlight, this is, everybody knows this already, but context does matter. Different institutions, different regions of different countries of the continent, but think of it as a single list of criteria of what needs to be done won't be effective. A box, a framework that has space for different institutions to approach in different ways will work. And then the idea of ideation, of not thinking about a single path forward, a single idea to move forward, a single plan to move forward, but come up with multiple plans. Maybe there's one that's working with the potential employers, one that's working with students, one that's working with faculty. And so if one plan shuts down, there are other opportunities, there are other paths forward. That's really very important. Somebody said in the comments that we do need to change the way we teach. And I think this is really important. If we're going to ask students to engage in complex ways, and then we model simplistic ways ourselves, that's not going to be particularly effective. So how can we bring complexity and that wickedness in the appropriate ways to our work? And then avoiding simple answers and recognizing that every step forward is a step forward. And these are big problems. These are big challenges. This conversation is a big conversation. Every step forward is a step forward. So I am so grateful to have been invited to be part of this conversation. I have been just inspired by the dialogues I've been hearing in the breakout rooms and in this report back. So just thank you all so much, and please do let me know if I can help in any way.
Thank you so much, Paul. We really, really appreciate it. And thank you for this very interesting and very thought-provoking topic that you presented to us. And thank you everybody else for participating, being so active. I think we have a lot of ideas, a lot of suggestions on how we might be able to move forward. And I know this conversation is going to continue. Our colleagues in the AU and the EU commissions, as well as the African Association of Universities. I know that everyone will make sure that we continue this conversation because, as people have indicated, it is very pertinent to what it is that we are doing in higher education these days. So thank you very much, everyone. And have a great rest of the week. We'll see you in another space. Thank you, Paul. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye. Bye, Elizabeth.
Bye. Bye, Charmaine. Thank you,
Bye,
colleagues.
Goodbye, Shami. Bye, Elizabeth.
Bye, Jonathan.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Eloy.
so
Thank
much.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
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 This has been great. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Dr. Richard. Bye.
You. Till next time.
Till next time, yes.